thing is loose in the brain. Who thought you should put this in the hands of mere mortals? What a mad, maniacal piece of equipment. Welcome to the Ferrari 599 GTO. Now, ever since this car launched, which was back around about 2010, I've been absolutely dying to get my hands on this car. This is the first time I've ever driven it. And typically, and this is becoming somewhat of a theme every time that I drive a front-engined, absolutely mad V12 Ferrari, it seems to drop below -4 and put me in a state of complete shock and terror. But here we are. Let's grin and bear it, get on with it, try and convey to you guys what this thing's all about and why I believe that this is indeed a modern classic. So, 599 GTO. The controversial and important bit about this car is, of course, the GTO moniker at the end. It's controversial because this is only the third car that Ferrari have ever applied the GTO moniker to. The first one began with 250 and the second one began with 288. And both of those cars originated as race cars that were homologated. GTO, by the way, stands for Gran Turismo Omologato, which is homologated in British tongue. Yes, both of those cars, the 250 GTO and 288 GTO, were homologated race cars, whereas the 599 GTO is not. So it is somewhat of a controversial topic that Ferrari went and applied the GTO moniker to a non-racing car. However, on the other side of the coin, at the same time as launching this incredible machine, Ferrari went and launched their XX variation of the car. It's called the 599XX, and it was a track-only version of the 599, and it was incredibly extreme. In fact, I had the honour of going up the Goodwood Hill climb in one last year. It somewhat reconfigured my smile glands. So Ferrari is saying that, well, actually, this is more than just a Vettel 599 GTB. This, in fact, think of this more of a detuned 599XX rather than a pumped up 599 GTB. And I can see both arguments. I'm not sure that's entirely true because I shall splice in some footage of going up the hill climb in the 599XX, and you can see for yourself that this is actually, in comparison, quite a refined road car. Right now, which automatically puts it into bumpy road mode as well, it's pretty compliant. Like, you could really use this thing every single day. 599XX, you certainly could not. Anyway, so let's discuss as to why this thing is, I believe, justified in the modern classic series that, thank you very much, has gone down so well on this channel. I'm so thankful of your guys' appreciation of it. So they conveniently limited this car to just 599 production examples worldwide, which of course instantly makes it a collector's car. And at the time of it launching, it was £100,000 more than your standard 599 GTB. Interestingly, they also managed to shave 100 kilograms of weight from your standard 599 GTB, meaning for every 1 kilogram saved, Ferrari charged you £1,000. Isn't that convenient? So at the time, the prices of these cars were coming in at around about £300,000, which, if you look at their prices today, doesn't seem too bad. And this is one of the reasons why I believe that it is truly a modern classic. It's almost 10 years old, but the prices of them are holding double over what they were at list. So even though this is a left-hand drive variant, you could quite easily be looking at around about £600,000 to £650,000 for this car. Right-hand drive variants, £750,000 easily. In fact, at the time when these cars sold out and everyone realised just how fantastic they were, I saw right-hand drive examples of the 599 GTO reaching, wait for it, nearly £1 million. Unbelievable, right? Now, it's interesting for me because I'm an F12 TDF owner, and to draw comparisons between those two cars is actually fascinating to see what amount of DNA has filtered down from this car and made its way into the TDF. Now, interestingly, the TDF was the first car that used 599XX engine components in it, which is odd because you'd thought that this car would use those components. But I think a lot of R&D took place before it filtered down and made it to any of their road cars. Let's talk about the way this thing drives. Well, first of all, listen to this. I mean, it just... That was in wet, and it decided to break loose. And I'm not joking you, that was probably 15% throttle depression. The amount of torque this thing has, the numbers are actually insignificant. The way it feels, I mean, the throttle response actually takes a little bit of adapting to, because it's like having a bomb under your right foot. Now, this car, I've noticed, particularly as I've been driving it in the ice and snow, really doesn't enjoy going slowly. That's from both throttle input and gearbox. Having a more conventional, last of the generation single clutch gearbox is it doesn't really like to go slow, and it is a little bit jerky. But as soon as you get that thing up to speed, you put it into race, it sort of re-maps itself for, you just listen to it, listen to the way it barbles. Let's just downshift a notch. Right, we're in second now in race mode. Just listen to this. Oh, and it just explodes. Over 6,000 RPM. This is the downshift. Wow. Multiple arousal horns firing simultaneously. Now, what's interesting about this is that I believe that the Scuderia and the 599 GTO are the world's greatest examples of how to configure a single clutch gearbox. As I mentioned, this car is now 9 years old. In terms of development, it's 10, almost 11 years old. It launched in 2010, we're in 2019 now, but it was in development for quite some time. So the actual platform is basically 10 years old. And the way this slams gears home, you have to be over 6,000 RPM, beyond 60% throttle depression, and the way this thing delivers gears then, you understand why the single clutch was used in this car. Not only were twin clutch gearboxes at that time not quite ready for the amount of power and torque that this car had, but importantly in the weight saving department, twin clutch gearboxes then really weren't as advanced as they are now, and they were really quite big units. So applying a single clutch box was an excellent way of shaving and contributing to the weight saving of that 100 kilograms that I mentioned earlier. So another contributing factor as to why this is going to be a very significant modern classic is the fact that at the time of launch, this was considered the most advanced front engine supercar in the world. Race car derived carbon ceramic brakes, very fancy aerodynamics, particularly ground effect on this car. Ferrari are famous for trying to avoid, where best possible on their road cars, not using fixed rear wings. And so what they end up doing is applying a lot of trickery and witchcraft underneath the car, creating ground effect, which sucks the car down on the floor. And at the time, the combination of race car derived carbon ceramics, very trick aero, highly polished cylinders in the engine, creating less friction, allowing this car to rev freer and ultimately contribute over 660 horsepower. It was an incredibly advanced car, and when you compared it back to back with the 599 GTB, this car was just transformed. I do see why they class this car more of a detuned version of the 599XX and not a 599 GTB on steroids, because the two cars are worlds apart. I once took a GTB around Ferrari's Fiorano circuit, and after a few laps I was like, this just isn't a track car. It very much is a more soft-paced Grand Tourer. This thing, when you get up it, you grab it by the scruff of its neck, it just comes into its own. It really does find its own sort of playing field when you're going quicker. It kind of rewards you once you start to give it a bit of stick, particularly when it comes to the way the chassis flows and the dampers work. Now, when you're going slowly, it does feel a little bit sharp. But of course, when that mass picks up and you start threading it down a bumpy B road like this, it comes alive, and the damping is supreme. But one thing I would say about this car, it is huge. Now, when you see it in isolation, it doesn't strike you as being that wide at first. But when I jumped in it, I couldn't believe the width of the car. So much so that when you're threading it down B roads and you're trying to keep it away from the dirty edges of the road at this time of year, you can't help but sort of bounce the inside right wheel over the cat's eyes, and it can become a little bit annoying. But when you get it back out onto A roads, it's not so bad. But I really am shocked at just how wide it is, but the road presence it has as a result. Look, listen to that. That was kind of an unintentional placement of having this car over the line. Look, that's just to try and avoid the curb on my left hand side here, because it's such a big car. But the road presence that I was just talking about, was the diffuser at the rear of this, has just got so much depth and sculpture to it. And of course, pretty much every contrasting panel that you see on the car is carbon fiber. If it's black, it's probably carbon. So as a spot more context, when the car launched, it lapped Fiorano faster than the Enzo, which is amazing considering the engine is in an entirely different place. But what's great about it, unlike their other flagship specials like the Enzo, because it sits on the GTB platform, it is also as usable as such. So you've got the big boots, you've got plenty of space for two, and it still adopts that Grand Tourer layout. So this is prime for swanning on down to the south of France. And then when you get there, if you fancy taking a detour down the Route Napoleon, it will reward you in bucket loads. It just sort of loses grip on you all the time. Now it is cold and wet, granted, but there's this quite unique top-end torque delivery. Actually, it's a combination of the ferocious explosion of revs together with this undertone of thick torque that once you get past 6, all hell breaks loose and you sort of hold on for dear life. And that's what I love about these special edition cars from Ferrari. They sort of take no prisoners. So what else will make this a significant car in the future is that it wasn't a case of Ferrari opening their order books and saying, come and buy a 599 GTO. In fact, all of these cars were sold out before the car was even announced, because they were reserved for long-standing clients of Ferrari, those who had heavily invested in the brand, even to the degree of people getting involved in Ferrari's own racing programs. These were the sorts of clients that would qualify to have these cars. And so getting hold of one was impossible unless you were essentially a friend of the brand. And so when we look back on history, these are going to be very special cars because they also had very special owners. But it's that level of exclusivity, isn't it, that sort of adds to the mystique of a car. People always want what they can't have. And even if they can have one now, they have to pay double for them. So that's what's going to position this thing as being quite a special car. That combined with the fact that it has the GTO badge at the end of it, rightly or wrongly, I'm not sure. Either way, when Ferrari puts GTO at the end of a number, it's for a good reason. Okay, so I've just got back to HWM, which is where I've collected the car from. This car isn't actually for sale, it's a friend of mine's car that just so happens to be storing it at HWM Aston Martin. Wonderful showroom. There's going to be a video surrounding some of that after this. But I just thought I'd take the opportunity to show you around the interior of this car and the location that I've spent most of the day sharing the drive with you guys. So let's have a look around. This is still the generation where Ferraris had actual keys. So we turn it over like that and on comes the dash. Now it's interesting because this car isn't actually that old, yet there's little things that make it feel dated, like the infotainment here does start to show its age somewhat, and the way that you interact with it. Look, it's just these two simple buttons on the dash here which will toggle through various different modes. And then if you look right on the back of the steering wheel, just here, this button is what controls the infotainment here to toggle up and down. So we can increase the brightness and go through the miles and toggle through the various different vehicle displays based off the setting of the Manettino. And interestingly, this is also one of the few modern day Ferraris which doesn't have bumpy road mode on the steering wheel. In fact, in the 599 GTO, you'll see there is no bumpy road mode at all. And it seems that if you put it into wet, that is the best way of just taking the edge off the relatively stiff dampers that are in race. Pretty cool feature down here. If I zoom in, you can see there's this really nice plaque celebrating 31 Formula One world titles. It's always a nice nod to Ferrari's success in Formula One. And then over here, it just shows you how Spartan this particular spec is on this GTO. There's not even a radio in this car. It really is all about just immersing you in the drive. And of course, everything you interact with, look, it's all matte carbon. And even the way that you control the airflow on the dials, it really is a simple off, on, and move these around in order to direct the flow. And as a result, you've got a really clean interface on the dash. You still have passenger and driver side control for the heating and air conditioning, and this is the simple areas where you can control it into which zones you want your air to flow. And then down here, always the sign of a performance car when you have the fire extinguisher strapped into the passenger seat footwell. And of course, they've gone with the Alcantara theme fully on this, and even the fire extinguisher itself is wrapped in Alcantara, which is a very nice touch. And then of course, earlier I was mentioning the harnesses. Now they are embedded, look, right in the back over this parcel shelf. They are mounted in there. I believe that these were an optional extra, because I think you can have standard seatbelts in these. And they really add to the drama of the drive. And then down here, we have familiar controls, albeit in a different configuration. So launch control, reverse, and auto. Oddly enough, you also press auto to put it into manual. So it's basically auto on off. And with all good track focus supercars, there's no glove box either. So that's just purely decorative. Continuing on the carbon theme, still got the carbon backed buckets, only these are matte as well, which is also pretty rare. And look at the vast amount of carbon on the door inlays. Look at the sculpture of that, it's so cool. And check out the size of the shift paddles. These are absolutely huge. And we still have the famous LED racing wheel. Now, when the revs reach optimum, this lights up, similar to F1, and blinks at you blue when it reaches the optimum time to shift. It's a pretty cool feature, and when you're blaring along and it flashes up at you, once again, it's adding another element of entertainment and drama to your drive. And this is interesting, sitting in a Ferrari which isn't that old, but has a really pared back steering wheel. I'm so used to being in a Ferrari and pushing my thumbs here to activate the indicators, but of course the 599 had a more conventional indicator stalk here. And then conveniently down on the central console for the passenger, if he's getting a little bit scared, he has this carbon grip rail in order to hang on to. And this was also the last of the platform to feature a conventional handbrake, which I actually kind of like.